Chapter 1. The forest felt like it was swallowing me whole. The towering pines stretched endlessly into the sky, their branches clawing at the clouds like skeletal fingers. My boots sank into the damp, leaf-strewn ground with each step, the weight of exhaustion pressing down on me, as heavily as the betrayal still burning in my chest. I tugged my shredded jacket closer, though it barely helped against the biting cold. Every branch that scraped my arm and every shadow that flickered in the corner of my vision reminded me how vulnerable I was now, an Omega outcast. The words still tasted bitter, even in my thoughts. They'd thrown me out like I was nothing, like I hadn't spent my entire life fighting for their approval. A twig snapped behind me, sharp and deliberate. My head whipped around, my heart kicking against my ribs. Nothing. But my senses didn't lie. The air carried a metallic tang that wasn't just the coming rain. My wolf stirred uneasily beneath my skin, urging me to move faster. The rustling started again, closer this time. I spun, growling low in my throat. "Whoever's out there, show yourself." My voice was steady, but my hands clenched into fists, nails biting into my palms. The response was a dark chuckle, low and mocking. It came from my left, then my right. Shadows moved among the trees, sleek and menacing. My breath hitched as a group of wolves emerged from the darkness, their eyes gleaming in the twilight like predator stars. "Well, look what we have here," one of them sneered, shifting back into his human form. His grin was all teeth, his tone dripping with mockery. "An Omega outcast. Must have been bad if even the Shadowfang Circle didn't want you." The others laughed, a cruel chorus that set my wolf on edge. I forced myself to stand tall, meeting their gaze with as much defiance as I could muster. "You've got two choices," I said, my voice cutting through their laughter like a blade. "Walk away now, or regret it later." The leader's grin widened. "Regret it? From you?" He stepped closer, his tone turning patronizing. "Oh, sweetheart, we're just getting started." They lunged. I moved on instinct, shifting mid-leap as claws swiped at me. My wolf wasn't the biggest or the strongest, but she was fast, and she was angry. I dodged the first attack, slamming into one of the rogues and sending him crashing into a tree. It wasn't enough. Another wolf hit me from behind, knocking the air from my lungs as I crashed to the ground. Teeth snapped inches from my neck, and I scrambled to get up, kicking wildly. A sharp pain lanced through my side as claws raked across my ribs. My vision blurred, and I tasted blood. "Not so tough now, are you?" the leader taunted, his voice muffled as my head spun. I snarled, forcing myself to my feet. My wolf howled in defiance, but the odds were stacked against me. 3 against 1. I wasn't going to win this fight. Still, I refused to go down quietly. Just as the leader lunged for the killing blow, the wind shifted. A powerful, overwhelming scent filled the air, wood smoke, pine, and something sharper, almost electric. And then he was there. A massive black wolf barreled into the rogue, sending him flying. The forest stilled as the other rogues froze, their attention snapping to the newcomer. He stood tall, his emerald eyes burning with an intensity that made my wolf pause, trembling but not in fear. The air thrummed with his presence, a raw, commanding energy that I couldn't ignore. And for the first time since my exile, I felt something other than anger. Hope. The dense forest was alive with the quiet hum of nature, branches swaying, distant rustles in the underbrush, but Caleb Stone's focus was elsewhere. He moved silently alongside Marcus, his beta, their sharp eyes scanning the Moonfang clan's border. Caleb's senses were always heightened in moments like these, his instincts sharpened by years of leadership. "We should circle back soon," Marcus muttered, his hazel eyes narrowing at the faint moonlight filtering through the trees. No signs of trouble so far. Caleb opened his mouth to agree but froze mid-step. A scent wild and electrifying hit him like a thunderclap. It wasn't just the crisp bite of pine or the earthy tang of rain-soaked leaves. This scent was unique, threaded with something sweet and intoxicating, and it coiled around his senses like a whisper of fate. His wolf surged forward, nearly breaking through his control. "Mate." "Caleb?" Marcus tilted his head, noticing the sudden tension in his alpha's frame. Caleb's voice was low, clipped. "Someone's here. Close." He took off without another word, his strides purposeful and silent. The scent grew stronger, tinged with fear, and the acrid smell of blood. Caleb's jaw clenched as his sharp gaze picked out shapes moving in the distance, 4 figures, circling something, someone. His stomach churned as he realized what he was seeing: rogues. Rogues, Marcus growled softly, now at Caleb's side. And a woman, Caleb added, his voice rough with something he didn't quite recognize. He didn't hesitate, his instincts roaring for him to act. Caleb burst through the clearing, just as the largest rogue lunged for the woman. Without thinking, he leapt mid-air, his body shifting in a seamless ripple of power. The black wolf hit the rogue with bone-crushing force, sending him sprawling into a tree with a sickening thud. Caleb growled, his deep, rumbling snarl vibrating through the air, commanding immediate submission. The remaining rogues froze, their predatory grins slipping into something closer to panic. Marcus shifted beside him, a lean brown wolf flanking the group with deadly precision. The rogues scrambled, snarling half-heartedly as they tried to retreat. Caleb didn't give them the chance. He lunged again, his massive form a blur of speed and strength. One swipe of his claws sent another rogue fleeing into the woods. Marcus took care of the third, his teeth snapping dangerously close to the rogue's hind leg, sending him yelping into the night. The clearing fell silent, save for the sound of Caleb's labored breaths. When he turned back to the woman, she was still standing, bloodied but unbroken. Her chin lifted defiantly, her eyes locked on him with a mix of fear and fire. She was stunning. Her pale blonde hair was a tangled mess, clinging to her sweat-dampened skin. Her tattered clothes bore evidence of the fight, but it was her eyes stormy blue and sharp as a blade that held him captive. "Who the hell are you?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the tremor in her body. Caleb shifted back, the transformation smooth and effortless, though his gaze never left hers. He expected gratitude, maybe relief, but she glared at him like he was just another threat. "I should be asking you the same thing," he replied, his voice gravelly but calm. Her defiance wavered for a fraction of a second, just enough for him to catch the faintest flicker of vulnerability in her expression, and that vulnerability stirred something fierce and protective inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Whoever she was, she didn't belong here, and yet, Caleb couldn't shake the overwhelming certainty that she belonged with him. Aria's legs trembled as the adrenaline faded, leaving behind a sharp ache in her ribs and a bone-deep exhaustion she couldn't ignore. Her breaths came in short, ragged gasps, but she forced herself to stay upright. The man, no. The alpha was watching her too closely, his piercing green eyes seeing far more than she was comfortable with. She didn't trust him. Couldn't trust him. "I don't need your help," she muttered, her voice sharper than she intended. She staggered a step back, her hands curling into fists at her sides. The alpha didn't move, but something in his stance shifted, a quiet, patient strength that only unnerved her further. He was too calm, too steady, as if nothing in the world could shake him. "You're bleeding," he said, his voice deep and steady, the kind of voice that left no room for argument. "I'm fine," she snapped, stumbling another step away. A faint smirk tugged at his lips, but there was no humor in his expression. "You're not fine," he said. "You can barely stand." Aria glared at him, her pride screaming louder than the pain. "I've been on my own this long. I'll manage." She turned sharply, ignoring the way the edges of her vision blurred, and tried to walk away. 1 step. 2. The world spun. Her knees buckled before she could stop it, and a soft curse slipped from her lips as gravity claimed her. Except she didn't hit the ground. Warm, strong arms caught her mid-fall, and for a moment, the rest of the world faded. Her head rested against a solid chest, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat drowning out her own chaotic pulse. The scent she'd caught earlier, wood smoke and pine, was stronger now, wrapping around her like a blanket. "Stubborn," he muttered, the word rough but not unkind. Aria blinked up at him, too drained to fight, but still bristling at the faint amusement in his tone. "Put me down." "Not happening." His arms tightened slightly, as if daring her to protest further. "I don't." "Trust me," he interrupted, his gaze locking onto hers. His voice softened, though it still held that commanding edge. "You don't have to. Just let me help." Her throat tightened at the sincerity in his words, and for a moment she didn't know what to say. She weighed less than he expected, her body too thin, too fragile. The blood staining her shirt sent a ripple of anger through him, anger at the rogues, Anger at Wiver had left her in this state. Marcus approached, his hazel eyes flicking between Caleb and the unconscious woman. "We can't take her back to the territory," Marcus said quietly, his tone laced with unease. Caleb didn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed on her pale, dirt-smeared face. Even unconscious, she seemed tense, her brow furrowed as if she was bracing for another fight. "She's hurt," Caleb said finally, his voice firm. Marcus frowned. "She's a stranger. For all we know, she's working with the rogues. She's not." Caleb didn't know how he knew he just did. The mate bond thrummed faintly beneath his skin, an instinct he couldn't ignore. Marcus sighed, raking a hand through his hair. "You're not exactly thinking with your head right now." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he forced his tone to remain calm. "We're not leaving her here. And if she's a threat, then I'll deal with it." Without waiting for a response, Caleb shifted her weight slightly in his arms and started walking. The wind rustled the trees above them, carrying the faintest whisper of her scent. He didn't know who she was, or why the bond had chosen her, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let her go. Chapter 2. The Moonfang clan's estate stood like a sentinel in the heart of the forest, its sprawling stone and wood structure blending seamlessly with the towering pines that surrounded it. The estate, usually a haven of quiet authority, buzzed with tension as Caleb strode through the open gates, Arya cradled in his arms. The pack gathered almost immediately, their murmurs a rising tide of unease. Wolves in human form emerged from training grounds and common areas, their eyes narrowing as they caught sight of the unconscious woman in Caleb's grasp. "Who is she?" one of the warriors whispered to another, the sharp edge of suspicion lacing their tone. "She smells like rogues," someone else muttered, loud enough for Caleb to hear. He didn't break stride, his expression carved from stone, but his wolf bristled at the comments. The need to protect, no, to defend. Arya surged through him, irrational but undeniable. Marcus jogged to catch up, his expression torn between frustration and concern. "You know how this looks, right?" he said under his breath, keeping pace with Caleb. "She's injured," Caleb said, his tone flat but resolute. "That's all they need to know for now." Marcus cast a wary glance at the pack, whose murmurs had turned to pointed stares. "You've got more than a few skeptics out here. Bringing an outsider, especially one with rogue blood on her, isn't going to sit well." Caleb paused in the doorway to the main hall, his gaze sweeping over his gathered pack. The murmurs stilled instantly, the weight of his authority pressing down like a physical force. "She's under my protection," he said, his voice calm but laced with an unspoken warning. "That's all you need to know for now." He didn't wait for their response, turning sharply and disappearing into the estate. The door to Caleb's private office shut with a soft click, muffling the outside noise. Marcus folded his arms, leaning against the desk as he studied his alpha. "Want to tell me what's really going on here?" Marcus asked, his tone carefully neutral. Caleb placed Arya gently on the couch in the corner of the room, his movements more cautious than he cared to admit. He straightened, fixing Marcus with a sharp look. "She's injured. That's enough reason." Marcus arched a brow. "Don't insult me, Caleb. You don't usually bring strangers, especially rogue, adjacent strangers, into our territory without a damn good reason." Caleb's jaw ticked, but he didn't respond immediately. How could he explain the pull he felt? The instinct screaming that Arya was meant to be here. "She's not a threat," Caleb said finally, though even he recognized how weak the words sounded. Marcus snorted. "You don't know that." "I know enough," Caleb shot back, his voice low and edged with warning. Marcus held his gaze for a long moment before sighing and throwing his hands up. "Fine. But if she so much as breathes wrong, I'm holding you accountable." Caleb's lips quirked in the faintest shadow of a smile. "You always do." The pack elder, Luna May, stood waiting near the guest quarters, her silver-streaked hair catching the glow of the nearby lanterns. Her warm, knowing eyes flicked to Arya and then back to Caleb. "You've caused quite the stir," Luna said, her voice as soft and steady as a lullaby. "I'm aware," Caleb replied, his tone clipped. He gestured toward the unconscious woman. "She needs care." Luna stepped closer, her gaze sweeping over Arya with a practiced eye. Her lips pursed briefly, then curved into a faint smile. "She's strong. She'll recover." Caleb inclined his head but didn't move to leave. Something in Luna's expression gave him pause. "What?" he asked, Luna's gaze was thoughtful, almost amused. You've brought a puzzle into this house, Caleb. One that might take more than your usual logic to solve. I'm not interested in puzzles, Caleb muttered. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. Luna chuckled softly, her hand resting briefly on his arm. Trust your instincts, Alpha. They've served you well so far. As Caleb watched her disappear into the room with Arya, he couldn't help but feel that Luna's words carried more weight than she'd let on. Arya woke with a start, her heart pounding in her chest. The air smelled different, clean and earthy, but unfamiliar. Her head throbbed, and every muscle in her body protested as she pushed herself upright. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the warm glow of lanterns and the rustic wood paneling. The space was far too luxurious for rogues. Plush bedding, a thick fur throw draped over a chair, and a window letting in the faint silver light of the moon. This wasn't a rogue hideout, but it wasn't freedom either. The sharp, instinctual urge to flee surged through her. Swinging her legs off the bed, she winced as pain flared in her ribs. Her hands tightened into fists as she braced herself against the headboard. She needed to figure out where she was and who had brought her here. The door creaked open. He was impossible to miss. Broad shoulders filled the doorway, and his presence was immediate, commanding, magnetic, and maddeningly calm. The man who had saved her stood there, his piercing green eyes locked on hers with unnerving focus. Good. You're awake, he said, his deep voice steady and measured. He didn't step closer, but his sheer presence made the room feel smaller. Where am I? She demanded, her tone sharp as a blade. Safe, he replied simply, as if that explained everything. Her eyes narrowed. That's not an answer. Caleb's gaze didn't waver. You're in my territory. Moonfang clan. My pack. The words settled heavily in the air. A pack. She hadn't expected that. Her hand moved to her side, a defensive instinct she couldn't shake. Why am I here? He leaned casually against the doorframe, his posture relaxed but his eyes still assessing her. You were bleeding out in the middle of the woods, surrounded by rogues. What did you expect me to do? Leave you there? Yes, she shot back, her voice rising. That would have been preferable to this. She gestured vaguely to the room, as if its comfort was a trap she couldn't trust. Caleb finally stepped into the room, slow and deliberate, like a predator giving his prey time to notice. Most people would say thank you. I'm not most people, she snapped, refusing to flinch under his gaze. His lips quirked, the faintest shadow of amusement crossing his face. I'm starting to see that. Her frustration flared. She hated the way he stood there so calmly, as if her anger couldn't touch him. If you expect me to grovel because you saved me, you're going to be disappointed. I don't expect anything, Caleb said evenly, his tone maddeningly composed. But I'm not going to apologize for keeping you alive. Arya clenched her fists, glaring at him. I didn't ask for your help. No, you didn't, he said, his voice softening slightly. But you needed it. The gentler tone caught her off guard, and for a moment, her defenses wavered. His eyes weren't just green, they were sharp and intelligent, but with a flicker of something she couldn't place. Concern? Why? She asked, quieter this time. Why would you risk helping me? Caleb's expression shifted, his jaw tightening as if weighing how much to say. Finally he settled on, because I couldn't walk away. The simplicity of his answer left her momentarily speechless. She wanted to argue, to poke holes in his reasoning, but the sincerity in his voice held her still. He moved closer, stopping just short of invading her space. His gaze flicked briefly to her injured side before returning to her eyes. You're not my prisoner, he said firmly. You're under my protection. That's it. Arya's pride still bristled, but something in his tone, steady, unyielding, calmed the storm inside her. She didn't trust him, not yet, but for the first time since her exile, she didn't feel completely alone. Fine, she said after a long pause, crossing her arms. But don't expect me to stay here any longer than I have to. His lips curved into a faint smirk. We'll see. And with that he turned and walked out, leaving her with more questions than answers and a nagging awareness of the heat that lingered where his gaze had touched hers. Caleb could see it in her eyes, the fire that kept her standing despite the wounds, the defiance that lashed out like a shield. But beneath it, faint and flickering, was something else. Fear, Not of him, but of something much deeper. He leaned against the small desk near the window, keeping his posture deliberately relaxed, though his instincts screamed to close the distance between them. "You're good at dodging questions," he said lightly, "but sooner or later I'll figure you out." Arya huffed, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. "You can try, but you won't get far." The corner of his mouth twitched. Challenge accepted. Her glare softened just slightly, and Caleb caught the barest flicker of hesitation before she turned her head toward the window. The moonlight framed her profile, illuminating the tension in her jaw. "I didn't betray them," she said suddenly, the words quiet but firm. Caleb straightened, his sharp senses catching the subtle waver in her voice. "Them? My pack," she clarified, though her tone lacked its usual bite. "Shadowfang Circle. They thought I did. They thought I gave information to humans, but I didn't." Her voice dropped to a whisper, more to herself than to him. "I'd never do that." The air between them stilled, heavy with her admission. Caleb's wolf stirred, sensing her pain, her isolation. He wanted to ask more, to dig into the truth of what had happened, but he stopped himself. She didn't need interrogation, she needed space. "You don't have to convince me," he said softly, his green eyes steady on hers. Arya turned to him, her gaze narrowing. "Why not? Everyone else assumes I'm guilty." "Because I trust my instincts," Caleb replied without hesitation. "And they're telling me you're not what they say you are." Her lips parted, a faint trace of surprise flickering across her face. For a moment, she looked at him not as an adversary, but as someone who might actually believe her. The words caught Arya off guard, their sincerity sinking into the cracks of her armor. She'd been bracing for suspicion, for judgment, but Caleb's calm acceptance threw her completely off balance. She watched as he pushed off the desk, his movements fluid and confident. He didn't say anything else, didn't press her or demand answers. Instead, he simply nodded toward the door. "You're safe here. Get some rest." Safe. The word echoed in her mind as Caleb turned to leave, his broad shoulders disappearing through the doorway. She released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, her body slumping back against the pillows. Her ribs ached, her head throbbed, but it was the strange pull in her chest that unsettled her the most. There was something about him, something she couldn't explain, even to herself. It wasn't just his confidence or the way he seemed to command the space around him. It was the way his presence felt steady, grounding, as if the chaos in her life quieted whenever he was near. Her hand moved instinctively to her chest, pressing against the faint ache blooming there. She didn't want to feel this way. She couldn't afford to. "I'm leaving," she whispered to the empty room, the words a promise to herself. But even as she said it, the memory of his green eyes lingered, and the ache in her chest deepened. The Alpha's hall was buzzing with energy, the kind that hummed just below the surface, ready to boil over at the smallest spark. My pack gathered in clusters, their voices low but urgent, their unease palpable. The soft flicker of firelight from the grand stone hearth cast long shadows against the wooden walls, but it wasn't enough to soften the hard looks on their faces. I stood at the head of the room, my arms crossed as I surveyed them. They weren't happy. That much was clear. "She's a risk," one of the warriors, Gavin, said, stepping forward. His tone was respectful, but there was a hard edge to it. "She smells like rogues, Caleb. She's not one of us." "I didn't ask for a reminder," I replied, my voice steady but sharp enough to cut through the murmurs. "She's an outsider," another voice chimed in. This one from Rhea, a fierce fighter whose loyalty to the pack was rivaled only by her stubbornness. "How do we know she won't turn on us the second she gets the chance?" The room fell silent, all eyes turning to me. The weight of their mistrust settled heavily on my shoulders, but I met their gazes without flinching. They needed answers. They needed reassurance. And I wasn't about to let my pack fracture over this. "Arya is under my protection," I said, my voice carrying through the room like a low growl. "She's injured, and she's not a threat. She could be working with the rogues," Gavin countered, his frustration bubbling over. "We can't risk the safety of the pack for a stranger." My wolf stirred, a deep, protective instinct surging to the surface. I stepped forward, letting the full weight of my authority settle over the room. "Do you think I'd bring someone here if I thought they were a danger to us?" The room stilled, tension thick in the air. My pack knew better than to question me outright, but I could see the doubt lingering in their eyes. From the hallway just outside the hall, I could hear every word, every accusation. It was like a knife twisting in my chest, though I'd heard worse before. She's a risk. She's not one of us. The words hit me harder than I wanted to admit. I leaned against the cool stone wall, my arms wrapped tightly around myself. Part of me wanted to storm in there and tell them exactly where they could shove their doubts. But the other part? The quieter, more fragile part? It just wanted to disappear. A voice broke through my thoughts, low and commanding, steady like the pull of gravity. "Caleb." "Area stays," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "I'm the one who decides what's best for this pack, and I'm telling you now she's not going anywhere." I swallowed hard, my throat tightening against the rush of emotions his words stirred. He didn't owe me his protection, not after everything. But there he was, standing against his entire pack for me. The voices in the hall died down, the power in his words silencing their protests. Even from where I stood I could feel it, the strength of his conviction, the force of his authority. It terrified me. And somehow it made me feel safer than I had in weeks. The Alpha's hall had mostly cleared, but the tension lingered like smoke after a fire. Marcus stood by the stone hearth, the embers casting warm, flickering light across the room. Caleb leaned against the massive oak table in the center, arms crossed, his green eyes distant, as he stared at nothing in particular. Marcus had known Caleb long enough to read him, even when he wore his stoic mask. This wasn't just a decision, it was a battle raging in his head, a tug of war between instinct and responsibility. "Caleb," Marcus began, his voice careful but firm. "Don't," Caleb interrupted, not even looking up. "I have to," Marcus shot back, stepping closer. "You know I do." Caleb's jaw tightened, the muscles flexing as he exhaled slowly. "Go on then, say it." Marcus folded his arms, mirroring his alpha but with less composure. "You're risking the pack for someone we know nothing about. You saw their faces in there, they're scared. Doubt doesn't just vanish because you give an order. It festers." Caleb's gaze finally met Marcus's, sharp and unyielding. "I know what I'm doing. Do you?" Marcus challenged, his tone softening just enough to show his concern. "I've never seen you act like this. Not for anyone." Caleb didn't answer immediately. He ran a hand through his dark hair, his fingers lingering at the back of his neck, as if trying to ease the weight pressing down on him. "She's not just anyone," he said finally, his voice quiet but steady. Marcus stilled, the words hitting harder than he'd expected. "What are you saying?" Caleb's eyes flickered, the conflict in them barely hidden. "I don't know yet, but I can't ignore this." He paused, his voice dropping into something almost vulnerable. "I don't want to." Marcus sighed, dragging a hand over his face as he stepped closer to the table. "Caleb, if this goes wrong," he hesitated, his usual confidence replaced by rare uncertainty. "You could lose them." "I won't," Caleb said firmly, though the words felt like a promise he wasn't entirely sure he could keep. "You don't know that," Marcus pressed, his hazel eyes searching Caleb's face. "The pack follows you because they trust you to protect them, to put them first. If they think you're making decisions based on," he gestured vaguely, struggling for the right words. "Feelings?" Caleb barked out a low laugh, though there was no humor in it. "You think this is about feelings?" Marcus raised a brow. "Isn't it?" For a moment, Caleb said nothing. His gaze drifted toward the hallway leading to the guest quarters, where Arya was resting. The pull he felt toward her was unlike anything he'd experienced, a magnetic force he couldn't resist, no matter how hard he tried. "It's instinct," Caleb said finally, his voice resolute, "and my instincts have never been wrong." Marcus sighed again, shaking his head. "You're putting a hell of a lot of faith in something you can't explain." Caleb met his Beta's gaze, his expression softening just enough to show the man beneath the title. "That's what being alpha is, isn't it? Trusting your instincts, even when no one else does." Marcus stared at him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Fair enough. Just don't lose the pack trying to save someone who doesn't want to be saved." Caleb's lips twitched in the faintest hint of a smile. "You're assuming she doesn't want to be saved." Marcus tilted his head. "Am I wrong?" Caleb didn't answer. Instead, he pushed off the table and strode toward the door, his movements deliberate and unyielding. As he walked away, he heard Marcus mutter under his breath, "This is going to be one hell of a mess." Caleb couldn't help the small smile that tugged at his lips. It probably would be, but something deep in his gut told him it would be worth it. Chapter 3. The cold, biting wind carried a scent Caleb didn't like. It was faint but unmistakable, a sharp tang of sweat then blood, mixed with the acrid stench of desperation. Rogues. He tightened his grip on the reins of his horse as it snorted, sensing the tension in the air. Around him, the forest loomed, its shadows long and thick beneath the silver glow of the moon. The scouts had been clear, rogues had breached the border, and they weren't alone. Alpha, one of the scouts said, falling into step beside him. The younger wolf's eyes darted nervously to the trees. They're moving in a tight formation, almost like they're organized. Caleb frowned. Rogues were notorious for chaos, for scrabbling together out of desperation rather than strategy. Organization wasn't their way. Spread out, he commanded, his voice low but firm. Flank them, but don't engage until I give the order. The wolves nodded, melting into the shadows with practiced ease. Caleb dismounted, his boots crunching softly against the frost-kissed ground. His wolf prowled beneath the surface, ready and restless, the need to protect his territory, and his pack driving him forward. He inhaled deeply, catching a fresher trail. Closer, his instincts roared to life. The rogue struck like a whip crack. One moment, the forest was silent save for the whisper of the wind through the trees. The next, shadows exploded from the underbrush, snarls ripping through the air. Caleb shifted in a fluid motion, the transformation a blur of power and ferocity. His black wolf leapt forward, intercepting the first rogue mid-lunge. Teeth met flesh, and the rogue yelped as Caleb tossed him aside like a rag doll. More followed, their movements shockingly coordinated. Caleb barely had time to process it before the next rogue came at him, claws flashing. He ducked low, his wolf's instincts taking over as he lunged upward, slamming the rogue to the ground. Around him, his pack fought in a frenzy of claws and snarls. The rogues weren't just attacking, they were aiming for weak spots, pushing his wolves toward vulnerable positions. This wasn't random. A growl rumbled deep in Caleb's chest as realization settled like a stone in his gut. Whoever was leading this attack knew what they were doing. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted Marcus fending off two rogues at once. Caleb moved instinctively, his massive frame barreling into one of the attackers. The rogue scrambled away, its yellow eyes gleaming with something close to malice. Before Caleb could chase it down, a sharp howl pierced the air, a signal. The rogues froze, their heads snapping toward the sound. And then, as quickly as they'd appeared, they were gone. Caleb shifted back, panting as he scanned the bloodied clearing. His pack stood in various states of disarray, their eyes wide with confusion and frustration. Alpha, Marcus said, striding toward him with a grim expression. That wasn't a normal attack. Caleb's jaw tightened. No, it wasn't. The ride back to the estate was tense, the weight of what they'd just faced settling heavily over the group. Caleb's thoughts churned, circling back to one glaring truth: someone was behind this. Someone who had a plan. And whoever it was, they weren't just targeting his pack, they were testing them. As they passed through the gates of the estate, Caleb's gaze drifted toward the guest quarters, where Arya was resting. The memory of her quiet admission the night before surfaced unbidden. They thought I betrayed them. He dismounted, handing his reins to one of the stable hands as Marcus fell into step beside him. You think this has something to do with her? Marcus asked, his voice low. I don't know, Caleb admitted, though the unease in his chest told him otherwise. But I'm going to find out. Marcus nodded, his expression wary. The pack's already on edge. If they think this is her fault, they won't, Caleb said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. Because I won't let them. But as he headed inside, his wolf growling restlessly beneath the surface, Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was only just beginning. The estate grounds were deceptively peaceful. The sharp tang of pine hung in the air, carried by a crisp breeze that whispered through the towering trees. Everywhere I turned, the forest loomed, ancient and watchful, like it held more secrets than the pack itself. I walked slowly, trying to shake the itch under my skin. Being cooped up inside felt too much like a cage, even if the walls were carved from luxury. My ribs ached with every breath, but I welcomed the pain. It was a reminder that I was still standing, still here, and still an outsider. The training grounds came into view as I rounded the corner of the main estate. Wolves in human form sparred in pairs, their movements fluid and precise. Others shifted mid-fight, claws slicing through the air as they dodged and countered with lethal grace. I lingered at the edge, curiosity outweighing my instinct to keep moving. Watching them felt like peering into a world I no longer belonged to, one I wasn't sure I wanted to rejoin. Not as intimidating as they look, are they? The voice was soft, almost amused. I turned to find Luna May standing a few feet away, her silver-streaked hair catching the sunlight like strands of moonlight. Her kind eyes crinkled at the corners as she smiled, and for the first time in days, I felt my guard drop, just slightly. "You're not one of them," I said, my tone careful but not unkind. Luna chuckled, stepping closer. "No, I suppose I'm not. I leave the sparing to the younger generation. These days I'm more of an observer." She glanced at the training grounds, her expression thoughtful. "It takes time to earn trust here, but you've already done something most outsiders can't." "What's that?" I asked, folding my arms. Caught the alpha's attention. Her gaze flicked back to me, sharp despite the warmth in her tone. My stomach twisted. "I didn't ask for his attention." "No," she said, her smile softening. "But sometimes fate doesn't ask for permission, does it?" Before I could respond, a group of younger pack members approached, their curiosity practically radiating off them. They couldn't have been older than 20, their wide-eyed expressions betraying a mix of suspicion and fascination. "You're the outsider, right?" one of them asked, his tone blunt but not unkind. "Guilty," I said, raising a brow. Another one, a girl with auburn hair and freckles dusting her nose, crossed her arms. "You don't look like much of a fighter." Luna gave me a look that was equal parts encouragement and mischief, and I couldn't help the grin that tugged in at palps. "You want to test that theory?" The girl hesitated, glancing at her friends before shrugging. "Sure, why not?" Within minutes, I found myself in the center of the training circle, the younger wolves watching with barely contained excitement. My ribs protested every movement, but I ignored the pain. If they wanted a show, I'd give them one. The girl lunged first, her movements quick but predictable. I sidestepped easily, grabbing her wrist and using her momentum to spin her away. She stumbled, letting out a startled laugh before recovering and coming at me again. This time I ducked low, sweeping her legs out from under her. She hit the ground with a huff, glaring up at me with a mix of frustration and admiration. "Not bad," she muttered, pushing herself to her feet. "Not bad yourself," I said, offering her a hand. As she took it, a ripple of laughter spread through the group. And for the first time since I arrived, I felt something close to acceptance. The moment didn't last long. I felt him before I saw him, his presence heavy and unyielding. Marcus stepped into the circle, his hazel eyes scanning the scene with quiet disapproval. "Having fun?" he asked, his tone light but edged with warning. I shrugged, meeting his gaze head-on. "Just stretching my legs. Stay out of pack affairs," he said, his voice dropping just enough for only me to hear. "You're here under Caleb's protection, don't push your luck." Anger flared in my chest, but I swallowed it down, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Noted. Marcus lingered for a moment, his gaze hard and unreadable, before turning and walking away. The younger wolves exchanged uneasy glances, but I forced a smile, waving them off. "Don't worry, I've handled worse." Luna May's voice was soft as she spoke beside me. "You're stronger than they think." "Maybe," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "But that doesn't mean they'll see it." As the group dispersed, I caught a glimpse of Caleb watching from the edge of the training grounds, his expression unreadable. For a moment our eyes met, and something passed between us, something electric and unspoken. I turned away before he could see the heat rising in my cheeks. Caleb's quarters were nothing like the rest of the estate, less imposing, more intimate. The polished wood floors gleamed in the soft glow of the lanterns, and the faint scent of cedar lingered in the air. A large desk sat against one wall, cluttered with maps and notes, while a worn leather chair near the fireplace hinted at a place he actually let himself relax. And there he was, standing near the desk, his broad shoulders bathed in the warm light. He didn't look up immediately, too focused on whatever he was studying. I considered leaving, just for the satisfaction of hearing him call me back. Instead, I I stepped inside, letting the door click shut behind me. "You summoned me, Alpha," I said, my tone dripping with mock formality. His head lifted, and those green eyes met mine, sharp as always. For a second, he didn't say anything, just looked at me, like I was some puzzle he couldn't solve. "You're not the least bit intimidated, are you?" he asked, crossing his arms. I shrugged, leaning casually against the doorframe. "Should I be?" His lips twitched, but the almost smile vanished as quickly as it came. "We need to talk about the attack," he said, his voice steady but tinged with something harder. There it was, the real reason I was here. I straightened, crossing my arms to match his stance. "What about it? Do you have any idea why they'd come so close to our territory?" he asked, his gaze narrowing. "Not a clue," I replied evenly. Caleb tilted his head, studying me like he was weighing my words. "Rogues don't usually organize like this. Someone's pulling their strings. Someone who knows enough about our pact to test our weaknesses. And you think that someone is me," I said flatly. His silence was answer enough. My chest tightened, but I held my ground, refusing to let him see how much the accusation stung. "Let me make this simple for you, Alpha. I didn't betray Shadowfung's circle, and I sure as hell don't have a death wish by betraying you." Caleb's jaw tightened, but his eyes softened. "Just a fraction. You're asking me to trust you, but trust isn't free. And neither is loyalty," I shot back, stepping closer. "But let me guess, your pack doesn't understand that, do they? Loyalty isn't about blind faith, it's about believing in someone even when everyone else doubts them." His gaze flickered, and I caught the faintest crack in his armor. I didn't know if my words had struck a nerve, or if he was just trying to figure me out. "You're quick to talk about loyalty," he said quietly, his voice almost a growl, "but you're still standing here, in my territory, not theirs." The words hit like a slap, even though he didn't raise his voice. My breath caught, and before I could stop myself, the truth slipped out. "I didn't leave Shadowfang," I said, my voice breaking. "They left me. Cast me out like I was nothing. Like all the years I spent fighting for them meant nothing." The room went silent, the weight of my admission hanging in the air between us. Caleb's expression shifted, the hard lines of his face softening as he took a step closer. "Area don't," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. But my walls were already crumbling, and the heat of his gaze wasn't helping. He stopped, but his eyes didn't leave mine. There was no pity there, just something quieter, deeper. "Understanding. You fought for them, and they turned their backs on you," he said softly, his words more statement than question. I nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, they did." His hand twitched at his side, like he wanted to reach for me, but wasn't sure he should. Instead, he let out a slow breath, his voice quieter now. "You didn't deserve that." The sincerity in his tone was almost worse than the accusations. My defenses faltered, and for a moment I let myself believe him. "Are we done?" I asked finally, my voice tight as I straightened and tried to shove the vulnerability back where it belonged. Caleb didn't answer right away. His gaze lingered on me, like he was seeing me differently now. "For now," he said, his voice low. I turned to leave, my hand on the door handle, when he spoke again. "Arya," he said, and I froze, not daring to look back. "If you're telling the truth," he hesitated, his tone softening in a way that made my chest ache. "You're safe here. I'll make sure of it." I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. The door clicked shut behind me, and as I walked down the hall, I couldn't shake the warmth of his words, or the way they made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. And that terrified me more than anything. Chapter 4. The forest smelled like damp earth and pine, the crisp night air carrying a faint chill that prickled against my skin. Moonlight filtered through the thick canopy of trees, casting long shadows across the uneven ground. I adjusted my grip on the reins, trying to ignore the stairs drilling into my back. It had taken every ounce of stubbornness I had to convince Caleb to let me join the scouting mission. Actually, convincing wasn't the right word. He didn't agree so much as finally stop arguing. "You don't need to be here," Marcus had grumbled when Caleb begrudgingly ordered a spare horse for me. "This isn't your fight." I'd shot him a glare sharp enough to cut glass. If the rogues are after me, it's exactly my fight. Caleb hadn't said anything then, just mounted his horse with a clipped motion, and led the group out of the estate, but I didn't miss the way his jaw tightened every time I fell into step beside him. Now, as we rode deeper into the woods, the silence stretched taut, heavy with unspoken tension. "You should have stayed behind," Caleb said suddenly, his voice low enough that only I could hear. I glanced at him, his green eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. He looked calm, as always, but I could see the tension in his grip on the reins, the way his shoulders were just a little too stiff. "And miss all this fun," I replied, forcing a smirk. "This isn't a game area. I never said it was." My tone softened just slightly, though I didn't break eye contact. "But if you think I'm going to sit around while someone hunts me, you don't know me very well." For a split second, something flickered in his eyes, something almost like respect. But then he turned his attention back to the path ahead, his expression hardening again. The first warning came as a subtle shift in the wind. I froze, my wolf stirring uneasily beneath my skin. The scent of pine was sharper now, almost bitter, and there was something else beneath it, something metallic and sour. "Rogues," Caleb said, his voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. Marcus gave a sharp whistle, signaling the group to stop. My heart hammered as the pack spread out, their movements precise and efficient. Caleb slid off his horse in one smooth motion, his body already coiled with tension. "They're close," he said, his eyes scanning the shadows. I dismounted, keeping low as I moved to Caleb's side. He gave me a brief look, his lips pressing into a thin line, but he didn't tell me to leave. The attack came fast, too fast. Shadows burst from the trees, snarls ripping through the air, as rogues lunged at us from all sides. I barely had time to register the chaos before a massive wolf with patchy fur and wild yellow eyes charged straight for me. Instinct took over. I ducked low, rolling out of the way as its claws raked the space where I'd just been. The ground was cold and damp beneath my palms, but I pushed off it with everything I had, twisting to face my attacker. "Area, stay back." Caleb's voice cut through the noise, sharp and commanding. "Not happening," I muttered, grabbing the nearest branch and swinging it at the rogue's head. It wasn't elegant, but it was enough to send it stumbling. The fight was a blur of movement and sound, growls, snapping jaws, the clash of claws against flesh. I caught glimpses of Caleb in the chaos, his black wolf tearing through the rogues with brutal efficiency. And then I saw it, another rogue, larger than the rest, barreling toward him from behind. Caleb was locked in a fight with two others, his focus elsewhere. "Caleb," I shouted, my voice cutting through the noise. I didn't think, I just moved. Grabbing a fistful of loose dirt, I hurled it at the rogue's face, aiming for its eyes. It snarled, shaking its head as it tried to clear its vision. That split second was all I needed. I launched myself at it, driving the pointed end of the broken branch into its side. The rogue yelped, stumbling back before retreating into the shadows. Caleb turned, his green eyes locking on mine. For a moment he just stared, his wolf's glowing gaze softening into something unmistakably human. "You're supposed to be staying out of trouble," he said, his voice rough but laced with something almost like amusement. "Guess I'm bad at following orders," I shot back, trying to catch my breath. The rogues retreated as suddenly as they'd appeared, their snarls fading into the distance. The clearing was eerily quiet now, save for the heavy breathing of our group. "Everyone okay?" Caleb called out, his voice steady despite the tension still radiating from him. A few scattered replies confirmed that no one was seriously hurt, but when we turned to check on the horses, my stomach sank. "They're gone," Marcus muttered, scanning the area. The rogues must have spooked them during the attack. Now we were stranded, miles from the estate with no immediate way to return. Caleb let out a low growl, his frustration evident, but he didn't waste time dwelling on it. "We'll move on foot. Stay close and keep your guard up." As we started walking, I fell into step beside him, the adrenaline still thrumming in my veins. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "Yeah," I said, glancing at him. "Thanks for asking." He gave me a look, somewhere between exasperation and admiration. "You're impossible." I couldn't help but grin. "Despite everything, you're welcome." The storm hit just as the last of the daylight faded. One moment, the air was calm, carrying the sharp scent of wet earth and pine. The next, a gust of wind tore through the trees, followed by a flash of lightning and a crack of thunder so loud it seemed to shake the very ground beneath my feet. I barely had time to react before Caleb grabbed my arm, pulling me toward an old, dilapidated cabin nestled in the trees. "Stay close," he ordered, his voice cutting through the howling wind. I barely had time to nod before he pushed open the creaky door, guiding me inside. The moment we stepped over the threshold, the warmth of the cabin hit me like a comforting wave. It wasn't much, just a small, rustic space with a stone fireplace, a few mismatched chairs, and a single bed that had clearly seen better days. But it was a shelter, and in the middle of the storm, that was all that mattered. I pulled the door shut behind me, shutting out the tempest. "What now?" I asked, shaking off the dampness of the rain. My voice came out a little too breathless, a little too shaken for my liking. Caleb was already at the fireplace, fiddling with some damp kindling. His back was to me, and for a moment, I allowed myself to watch him, the way his muscles flexed beneath his shirt as he worked. He moved with that same quiet, unyielding strength, the kind that had always intrigued me. "The storm won't pass soon," he said, his voice low and steady. "We'll stay here for the night." A flash of lightning illuminated the small space, and the moment stretched between us, thick with something unsaid. The storm outside raged, but inside, a different kind of tension filled the air. I wasn't sure how much longer I could stand being so close to him. I pulled my jacket tighter around my shoulders, more from the intensity of the moment than from any lingering cold. Caleb didn't seem bothered by it, his broad frame already seeming to fill the room with his presence. There was a part of me, an embarrassing, ridiculous part, that wanted to close the distance between us, feel the heat of his body against mine. But I couldn't. Not when things between us were so fragile. I turned toward the small window, my eyes drawn to the wild storm beyond the glass. The wind howled, rattling the cabin's shutters. "Pretty intense? Huh?" I said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. It felt like an attempt to deflect, to keep things light when they were anything but. "Yeah," Caleb replied, his tone just as low, his gaze flicking toward me before he turned back to the fire. "But we'll be safe here. No need to worry." I wanted to argue that I wasn't worried, that I could take care of myself. But the words stuck in my throat. A part of me, deep down, didn't want to push him away, didn't want to keep up the stubborn walls I'd spent so long building. The moment of silence stretched until Caleb finally turned to face me, his eyes catching mine. "You're staring," he said with a teasing smirk, though there was a tiredness behind his words. I flushed, embarrassed that I'd been caught. But before I could make some smart remark, I noticed the fresh blood staining his shirt. His left side was bruised, the flesh swollen from the earlier fight with the rogues. "You're hurt," I said, my voice tight. I stepped closer without thinking, reaching for his shirt. Caleb tensed, but he didn't pull away. "It's nothing," he muttered, looking away as I unbuttoned his shirt, the quiet crackle of the fire filling the space between us. "I'll be fine." "Let me be the judge of that," I said, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. I had a feeling I wasn't just talking about the injury anymore. I gently lifted his shirt, wincing at the sight of the bruises already blooming across his chest. It wasn't the first time I'd seen him like this, wounded, vulnerable, but for some reason, it felt different this time, more intimate. I grabbed a cloth from the small table near the fire, dampening it with water and gently pressing it against his side. His sharp intake of breath made me pause, and for a moment, I met his eyes. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice strained but not entirely dismissive. "Taking care of you," I replied softly, my fingers lingering against his skin. The pulse of heat between us was unmistakable. He looked at me for a long moment, his gaze searching, conflicted. His lips parted, as if he wanted to say something, but no words came. The silence between us was thick, heavy with unspoken emotions, and a tension neither of us knew how to navigate. And then, almost imperceptibly, I felt it, the faintest spark of warmth, of something deeper, pulling me toward him, the mate bond. I knew what it was, had always known. But now, with him this close, it felt like the world was shifting beneath me. A pull so strong, so undeniable, that my body reacted before my mind could process it. Caleb, I breathed, barely aware that his name escaped my lips. His hand reached up, brushing a lock of wet hair from my face, his touch sending a shiver down my spine. "You're making it hard to concentrate, you know that," he said, his voice rough, not entirely joking. "I wasn't trying to," I murmured, my pulse quickening. The space between us closed by mere inches, and I could feel the heat of his body against mine. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The storm outside raged on, but inside, the storm between us was building slow, inevitable, electric. The cabin felt smaller now, the air charged with the kind of tension you couldn't ignore, even if you tried. The storm outside was relentless, rattling the shutters and howling through the cracks, but it was nothing compared to the storm brewing between Caleb and me. I kept my hands busy, pretending to fuss over the cloth in my hands, even though I'd already cleaned his wound. His quiet gaze bore into me, his presence too steady, too grounding, and I hated it. Hated how safe it made me feel. "You're too quiet," I muttered, breaking the silence. "It's unsettling." He leaned back slightly, resting one arm on the edge of the chair he'd claimed as his throne in this tiny room. His lips curved into the faintest smirk. "Would you prefer I fill the silence with orders you'll ignore?" I rolled my eyes, turning my attention back to the fire, though the warmth in my cheeks betrayed me. "Maybe I just like to know what's going on in that overthinking alpha head of yours." "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," he said, his tone soft but laced with something deeper. I glanced at him, raising a brow. "Try me." For a moment he didn't respond, just watched me like he was waiting for something, or maybe bracing himself. Finally he exhaled, his gaze dropping briefly before finding mine again. "You didn't ask for any of this, did you?" The question hit harder than I expected, and I froze, the cloth in my hands forgotten. "No," I said quietly, my voice rawer than I meant it to be. I didn't plan to say more, but the words started spilling out, jagged and broken like pieces of glass I'd been holding on to for too long. "They thought I betrayed them," I began, my throat tightening as the memories clawed their way to the surface. My own pack, my family, they didn't even give me a chance to explain, just cast me out like I was nothing. I swallowed hard, my nails digging into my palms as I forced myself to meet his gaze. "Do you know what it's like to fight for people who don't believe in you? To give everything you have, only to be thrown away, like you don't even matter?" His expression shifted, softening in a way I hadn't expected. For the first time since I'd met him, the hard edges of his alpha facade seemed to crack. "Yeah," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I do." I blinked, surprised. "You." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped tightly, as if he were holding something back. "Years ago, before I was alpha, there was a rogue attack on the border. My best friend, Leo, was leading the patrol. I wasn't with him that night. Should have been, but I wasn't." He paused, his jaw tightening. "The rogues were organized, more than we expected. They ambushed the patrol. Leo," his voice faltered for a moment, and he closed his eyes, like he was still seeing it. "He didn't make it." I watched him, my chest aching at the weight of his words. "The pack blamed me," he continued, his voice steadier now. "Said I should have been there, that if I'd been stronger, faster, Leo would still be alive. And maybe they were right. I'll never know." "You can't blame yourself for that," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. He gave a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Maybe. But it doesn't stop the whispers. The doubts. Sometimes I wonder if they ever really went away." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The storm outside roared, the wind shaking the cabin like it was trying to tear it apart. "I get it," I said finally, my voice soft. "That feeling of not being enough. Of being expendable." "You're not expendable, Arya," he said, his voice sharp with conviction. "Not to me." The words hung in the air, heavy and electric. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to process the way my chest tightened at the look in his eyes. "You don't even know me," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Maybe not," he admitted, his gaze unwavering. "But I see you." My breath caught, and for a moment the world outside didn't exist. There was only the crackle of the fire, the warmth of his presence, and the way his eyes seemed to burn right through me. He stood, closing the space between us in a single step. I couldn't move, as his hand lifted, brushing a stray strand of hair from my face. His fingers lingered for a moment, and my skin burned where he touched me. "Arya," he said, my name a quiet rumble that sent shivers down my spine. I didn't trust myself to speak, so I just looked up at him, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. He leaned in, his breath warm against my skin, and for a moment I thought. A deafening crack of thunder shook the cabin, startling both of us. I jerked back, my heart racing for an entirely different reason now. Caleb stepped back too, his jaw tightening as he looked toward the window. "We should check the shutters," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Right," I said quickly, my cheeks burning. The shutters. The moment was gone, but the pull between us remained, heavy and undeniable, and as I turned away, I couldn't help but wonder what might have happened if the storm hadn't interrupted us. The forest was quieter in the morning, its usual symphony of rustling leaves and birdsong muted, as if the trees were holding their breath. The storm had passed, but the air still carried its remnants, a damp chill that clung to my skin, and the faint scent of rain lingering in the mossy undergrowth. I glanced at Caleb, walking a few paces ahead of me, his broad shoulders stiff with unspoken tension. He hadn't said much since we left the cabin, but his presence was as steady as ever, a magnetic pull that seemed impossible to ignore. The bond between us was different now, stronger. I could feel it, like an invisible thread weaving tighter around us with every shared glance, every unspoken word. And that terrified me as much as it intrigued me. "You're awfully quiet," I said, breaking the silence. He glanced back at me, his green eyes catching the sunlight in a way that made my chest tighten. "Just thinking." "Dangerous?" I teased, though my voice came out softer than I intended. A hint of a smile tugged at his lips, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Someone has to." I rolled my eyes, but the faint smile on my face betrayed my amusement. Caleb was an enigma, calm and composed on the outside, but I was starting to see the layers beneath. The way he carried the weight of his pack's expectations, the unspoken vulnerability he hid so well. And the way he looked at me sometimes, like I was a puzzle he wanted to solve. The Moonfang clan estate came into view as we emerged from the trees, its stone walls standing tall against the backdrop of the forest. My steps slowed as unease settled in my chest. Returning meant facing the pack, their mistrust and suspicion waiting like a storm cloud ready to burst. "Second thoughts?" Caleb asked, his voice low but laced with quiet concern. I shook my head, forcing my feet to keep moving. "Not my style." "Good." His tone softened just slightly. "Because you don't have anything to prove to them." I snorted, glancing at him. "Easy for you to say. You're their alpha. I'm just the outsider they'd probably like to see gone." He stopped walking, turning to face me fully. "You're not just anything, Arya." His voice was firm, his gaze steady, as if daring me to argue. I opened my mouth, but the words caught in my throat. The sincerity in his tone left me momentarily speechless, and for a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to believe him. Luna May was waiting near the entrance of the estate, her silver-streaked hair catching the morning light as she leaned against the wooden railing. She smiled as we approached, her sharp, knowing eyes flicking between Caleb and me. "You're back in one piece," she said, her tone warm but tinged with something else, amusement maybe. "Mostly," Caleb replied, his voice tinged with his usual calm authority. Luna's gaze lingered on him for a moment before shifting to me. "And you? How are you holding up, dear?" I hesitated, unsure how to respond to the genuine concern in her voice. "I'm fine," I said finally, though it sounded more like a question than a statement. Luna hummed thoughtfully, her smile deepening. "Good, you'll need to be strong for what's ahead." "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. She didn't answer directly, instead turning her attention back to Caleb. "The bond between you two, it's not something to fight against." Caleb stiffened beside me, his jaw tightening. "It's complicated," he said after a moment, his tone carefully measured. Complications are part of life, Luna replied, her voice gentle but firm. But sometimes the things we resist the most are the things we need the most. Her words hung in the air like a challenge, and for a moment, I thought Caleb might argue. But he said nothing, his gaze dropping to the ground as if lost in thought. I glanced between them, the tension crackling like static. Whatever Luna May saw in us, it was enough to unsettle even Caleb, and that made it all the more difficult to ignore the pull I felt every time I looked at him. As Luna stepped back inside, leaving us alone in the morning light, I couldn't help but wonder if she was right. If the bond between us was more than just a cruel twist of fate. And if Caleb felt it too. Chapter 5. The Alpha's Hall was a place of authority and power, where decisions were made and alliances forged. Today, though, it felt like a battlefield. The murmurs of the gathered pack were sharp and cutting, each word aimed at me. The grand stone walls, which had seemed so imposing before, now felt like they were closing in. Caleb stood at the head of the room, his expression unreadable, but the tension in his posture was impossible to miss. His arms were crossed, his jaw set tight, and his green eyes fixed on the sheaf of papers Marcus had just handed him. "That's it?" Caleb's voice was low, dangerously calm. "It's everything," Marcus replied, his tone grim. "We found it on the edge of the last rogue attack site." The papers changed hands, moving from Caleb to the nearest warriors. Their eyes widened as they read, and then they turned to me, their gazes heavy with accusation. "It's her handwriting," Rhea, one of the senior pack members, said. Her voice was loud enough to carry through the hall, and each word felt like a knife to my chest. "It's forged," I snapped, stepping forward. "I didn't write that. I don't even know what it says." Caleb's eyes finally met mine, but they didn't carry the reassurance I was hoping for. Instead, they were guarded, as if he were weighing my words against the damning evidence in his hands. "The document outlines our patrol schedules," Rhea said, her voice sharp. "It was found with rogue tracks leading away from it. Convenient, isn't it?" "That doesn't mean it's mine," I said, my voice rising with desperation. "I've been with you since the attack. How could I have passed information to them?" "It could have been before," Gavin added, his tone cautious but firm. "We don't know how long she's been planning this." "Planning this?" The words felt like a slap. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, my wolf snarling beneath my skin at the injustice of it all. "You really think I'd side with rogues? After what they did to me?" My voice cracked despite my best efforts to keep it steady. Rhea crossed her arms, her expression cold. "What we think doesn't matter. What matters is the risk you pose to the pack." The room erupted into chaos, voices rising as the pack debated my fate. Some called for my immediate banishment, while others, quieter but still insistent, suggested keeping me under constant guard. Through it all, Caleb said nothing. He stood at the center of the storm, his silence cutting deeper than any of the accusations being hurled my way. "Alpha, you need to act," Marcus said, stepping closer to him. "The pack needs to see you put their safety first." Caleb's gaze flicked to me, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something doubt, maybe, or regret. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the stoic mask he always wore when the weight of his title pressed down on him. "Arya," he began, his voice low, steady, but painfully distant. I didn't let him finish. "No," I said, cutting him off. My voice was louder than I intended, echoing off the stone walls. "Don't bother." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to me. I forced myself to meet Caleb's gaze, even though my heart felt like it was shattering into pieces. "I get it," I said, my voice quieter now but no less firm. "They don't trust me. And if you won't stand up for me, why should they?" Caleb flinched, just slightly, but it was enough to remind me that he wasn't as unaffected as he wanted everyone to believe. "I'll leave," I continued, my chest tightening as I said the words. "Not because I'm guilty, but because I can't keep living like this, watching my back every second, waiting for the next accusation. If I stay, it'll tear your pack apart. And I won't let that happen." I turned to the crowd, their faces a mixture of shock, suspicion, and in some cases, guilt. "You'll see the truth eventually. When you do, I hope it's not too late." Without waiting for a response, I turned on my heel and walked out of the hall. My steps were steady, My head held high, but every inch of me ached. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay. Not here, not like this. The forest stretched endlessly before me, a maze of gnarled trees and shadows that felt as familiar as it did threatening. The scent of damp earth and decaying leaves clung to the air, mingling with the faint, acrid tang of something else, something unnatural. My breath misted in the cold evening air as I crouched near a fallen log, studying the tracks in the mud. They were faint, but unmistakable. Wolves. Not Caleb's pack, though. These tracks were heavier, the claw marks deeper and more erratic. Rogues. I tightened my grip on the dagger at my side, my pulse hammering in my ears. This wasn't the first time I'd found traces of them, but it was the first time they felt this deliberate, like breadcrumbs leading me somewhere. Somewhere dangerous. Evelyn, I muttered under my breath, her name tasting bitter on my tongue. I'd overheard enough in the Alpha's hall to piece it together. Evelyn Carter's name had been whispered too many times, her fingers in too many places, for it to be a coincidence. If anyone had reason to frame me, it was her. But proving it, that was a whole other battle. And I was going to win it. The tracks led deeper into the wilderness, toward the Shadowfang Circle's old borders, a place I hadn't dared to think about since my exile. Memories clawed their way to the surface as I moved through the trees, sharp and unforgiving. The whispered accusations, the cold stares, the way my pack had turned on me without a second thought. I shook my head, forcing the memories back. This wasn't about them. It wasn't even about me, not really. It was about the truth. About protecting Caleb's pack from whatever Evelyn and Damien were planning. The trail grew fainter as the ground hardened, the trees thinning to reveal jagged cliffs in the distance. The wind picked up, carrying with it a low, haunting howl that sent a shiver down my spine. Perfect, I muttered, scanning the area for any sign of movement. And then I heard at the faintest rustle, the crack of a twig underfoot. My instincts screamed, and I dove to the side, just as a rogue lunged from the shadows, its claws raking through the air where I'd been standing. The impact of my roll knocked the air from my lungs, but I scrambled to my feet, the dagger in my hand before I'd even registered the movement. The rogue snarled, its yellow eyes gleaming in the dim light. Two more emerged from the trees, circling me like vultures. Great, I muttered, tightening my grip on the hilt of the blade. Outnumbered. Again. The first rogue charged, its claws slicing through the air. I ducked low, slashing upward with the dagger, the blade biting into its shoulder. It howled, stumbling back. But the others didn't hesitate. I spun, dodging another swipe and slamming my elbow into the second rogue's jaw. Pain lanced through my arm, but the rogue staggered, giving me just enough time to put some distance between us. The third rogue was smarter, hanging back as the others closed in. My breath came in short, ragged bursts as I weighed my options. Run or fight? Another growl answered the question for me. Run. I turned and bolted, my feet pounding against the uneven ground as I wove through the trees. The rogues were fast, but I was faster just barely. Branches tore at my clothes, the wind whipping through my hair as I pushed myself harder. The ground dropped suddenly, and I skidded to a halt at the edge of a narrow ravine. The wind roared in my ears as I turned, the rogues closing in. Come on, I muttered, raising the dagger as they lunged. But before they could reach me, a deafening howl split the air. It wasn't theirs. It was deeper, more commanding, a sound that sent the rogues skittering to a stop. For a moment they hesitated, glancing at each other before retreating into the shadows. My chest heaved as I lowered the dagger, my knees threatening to give out beneath me. Whoever that howl belonged to, it wasn't Caleb's pack, and it wasn't here to save me. I sat at the edge of the ravine for a long moment, my pulse still racing. The wilderness was quiet again, the storm of the fight giving way to an eerie stillness. I could turn back. I should turn back. But I couldn't. The memory of Caleb's expression in the Alpha's hall burned in my mind, the way he'd hesitated, the way he hadn't stood up for me when I needed him most. If I went back now, it would be with nothing, no proof, no answers, just more questions and mistrust. I tightened my grip on the dagger, pushing myself to my feet. I wasn't running anymore. Evelyn and Damien wanted to play this game. Fine, I'd play. But I was going to win. Even if it meant walking straight into the lion's den. The papers sat spread across his desk, their edges curling slightly under the weight of the lantern's heat. Caleb leaned over them, his elbows resting on the wood, the faint scent of pine resin and old parchment mixing with the heavier weight of doubt pressing on his chest. It didn't add up? The handwriting was convincing, sure, but it wasn't exactly hers. Subtle discrepancies, the way certain letters slanted, the spacing between words stood out like tiny cracks in a perfectly smooth surface. If he hadn't been so blinded by the chaos of the moment in the hall, he might have caught it earlier. Now, staring at the supposed evidence, the truth clawed its way into his mind. Evelyn, he muttered under his breath. The name felt sour, bitter. Her involvement was too convenient. She'd been quick to provide the documents, quick to stoke the pack's fears. And her connection to Damien? That wasn't just smoke, it was fire. He let out a low growl, the sound vibrating through the room. How could he have let this happen? How could he have doubted Arya, even for a moment? The soft creak of the door pulled him from his thoughts. Luna May stepped inside, her presence calm but commanding as always. She didn't wait for an invitation, crossing the room with the ease of someone who had long ago earned her place. "You're brooding," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "Never a good look on you, Caleb." He huffed, not in the mood for her usual playful banter. "I'm trying to fix this." "And what exactly is this?" she asked, her sharp eyes scanning the papers on his desk before landing on him. "Arya," he admitted, the name coming out like a confession. Luna's gaze softened, though her expression remained serious. "You're trying to fix a mistake you never should have made in the first place." Caleb looked away, the guilt pressing heavier now. "I was trying to protect the pack. And instead, you let fear blind you to what's right," she said, her voice cutting but not unkind. She stepped closer, resting a hand on his arm. "You felt the bond, didn't you?" His silence was answer enough. Luna's lips curved into a faint smile. "The mate bond isn't something you can run from, Caleb. Trust me, I've seen enough of them to know. It's not just about fate, it's about trust, about seeing the truth in someone even when no one else does." He let her words sink in, the weight of them settling deep in his chest. "She's out there, alone," Luna continued, her voice quieter now. "And if you don't go after her, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." When Luna left, the room felt colder, emptier. Caleb sat back, running a hand through his hair as the enormity of his mistakes hit him like a tidal wave. He'd been wrong. About Arya, about everything. He should have trusted her, should have stood by her in the Alpha's hall, instead of letting the pack's doubts cloud his judgment. His mind wandered to her fiery defiance, the way her eyes sparked with determination, even when the world was against her. The bond between them tugged at him now, stronger than ever, as if her very soul was calling out to his. He couldn't ignore it anymore. Caleb pushed to his feet, grabbing his jacket from the back of the chair. He strode to the door, his steps purposeful, his mind made up. "Where are you going?" Marcus asked, appearing in the hallway with his usual wary expression. "To fix my mistake," Caleb said, his voice steady, his resolve unshakable. "And the pack. They'll survive," Caleb replied. "Right now, Arya needs me more." Without waiting for Marcus's response, he stepped out into the night, the cold air biting against his skin. The moon hung high above the trees, casting its silver light across the estate. His wolf stirred beneath the surface, restless and ready. He didn't know exactly where Arya was, but he didn't need to. The bond between them would lead him to her, and this time he wouldn't let her down. Chapter 6. The fortress was a crumbling relic of the past, its jagged walls and vine-choked towers standing defiantly against the night sky. The air was damp and heavy, filled with the scent of moss and rot. Shadows clung to every corner, the faint sound of rustling leaves and distant growls the only signs of life. I crept along the perimeter, keeping low to the ground as I scanned for any signs of movement. My heart pounded in my chest, a steady rhythm that matched the tension coiled in my muscles. This was at the heart of their operation, where Evelyn and Damien had been planning their attack on the Moonfang clan. The dagger at my side felt heavier than usual, its cold hilt a constant reminder of what was at stake. A narrow opening in the crumbling wall caught my eye. It wasn't much, barely wide enough for me to slip through, but it was better than trying the main entrance. Taking a steadying breath, I pressed myself against the cold stone and slid inside. The air inside the fortress was colder, heavier. Voices echoed faintly down the stone corridors, sharp and low. I followed the sound, my steps careful, silent. The passage opened into a larger chamber, and I froze, ducking behind a broken pillar. Evelyn's voice was unmistakable, smooth and sharp, like a blade wrapped in silk. "They're weaker than we thought," she said, her tone smug. "The attack on the border proved that. The Moonfang clan is ripe for the taking." Damien's low growl answered her, his presence a dark shadow in the dim light. "And the Alpha? He's no fool. He'll come looking for her." Her laughter was cold, cruel. "Let him. Caleb's obsession with that little Omega will be his downfall. Once he's out of the way, the pack will crumble." My breath caught in my throat, anger and fear twisting together in my chest. Evelyn had planned this all along. She'd used me as a scapegoat, knowing the pack's mistrust would keep them distracted while she and Damien schemed. And now, she was counting on Caleb to walk into her trap. A sharp creak behind me broke my focus. I spun, my heart leaping into my throat, as two rogues emerged from the shadows, their yellow eyes gleaming with malice. Well, one of them sneered, his voice low and guttural. "Look what we have here." I tightened my grip on the dagger, my pulse racing. "I was just leaving," I said, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at the edges of my mind. "Don't think so," the other rogue growled, blocking my escape route. I shifted my weight, preparing to fight, but more footsteps echoed down the corridor. 2 became 4, then 5. The odds weren't just against me, they were impossible. My wolf stirred beneath my skin, restless and ready, but I knew this wasn't a fight I could win alone. The first rogue lunged, and I dodged, slashing with the dagger as I moved. The blade bit into his arm, and he snarled, staggering back. Another came at me, claws slicing through the air. I twisted away, my breath coming in sharp, ragged bursts as I tried to hold them off. But they were closing in, their snarls a deafening roar in my ears. And then, out of nowhere, a familiar howl split the air. The rogues hesitated, their heads snapping toward the sound. I barely had time to process it before Caleb appeared, his massive black wolf a blur of power and fury. He slammed into the nearest rogue, his teeth sinking into its shoulder and sending it crashing to the ground. The others scrambled to regroup, but Caleb was relentless, his movements precise and deadly. Relief flooded through me, but there was no time to dwell on it. Another rogue lunged at Caleb and I threw myself into the fight, driving my dagger into its side. "Glad you could make it," I called over the chaos, my voice breathless but laced with a hint of humor. Caleb shifted mid-movement, his human form no less imposing as he turned to face me. "Couldn't let you have all the fun," he said, his green eyes flashing with intensity. The rogues circled us, their snarls echoing through the chamber. Caleb stepped closer, his presence a steady anchor in the chaos. "Ready?" he asked, his voice low but steady. "Always," I replied, tightening my grip on the dagger. We moved as one, fighting side by side in a blur of claws, teeth, and steel. The bond between us thrummed with every movement, an unspoken connection that drove us forward. For the first time in a long time, I felt invincible. The room pulsed with tension, every flicker of firelight casting Evelyn's sharp features into sharper relief. She stood across from me, her lips curling into a sneer that didn't quite mask the fire in her eyes. Around us, the sounds of the battle faded, leaving only the rhythmic pounding of my heart and the sharp, shallow rhythm of my breathing. "You think you've won something by being here?" Evelyn's voice dripped venom, her eyes narrowing. "Always the scrappy little survivor, aren't you, Arya?" I tightened my grip on the dagger in my hand, refusing to let her see the way her words clawed at old wounds. "Funny, I was just thinking the same thing about you. All bark, no bite." Her sneer deepened. "You don't get it, do you? You've always taken what was mine. First Shadowfang's loyalty, then Caleb's attention. And now, even after they cast you out, you're still in my way." Her words hit like a blow, not because they were true, but because they carried the weight of her twisted obsession. "You're blaming me for your failures?" I asked, my voice sharp, cutting. "You betrayed your pack. You sided with rogues. You chose this path, Evelyn. Not me." She laughed bitterly. the sound echoing in the ruined fortress. I was supposed to have it all. The power, the respect, the bond. Her gaze hardened, her body tensing. But you had to exist. Always the underdog, always so pure. I didn't take anything from you, I said, my voice steady despite the storm swirling in my chest. But I'll make sure you don't take anything from anyone else. Evelyn lunged, her claws slicing through the air with deadly precision. I twisted out of the way, my wolf stirring beneath my skin, ready to fight. The stone floor was cold beneath my feet as I moved, each step calculated, deliberate. Her attacks were wild, fueled by anger and desperation, but I knew better than to underestimate her. She wasn't just fighting to win, she was fighting to destroy me. You don't deserve the bond, Evelyn hissed, her eyes blazing. You don't deserve him. I met her charge head-on, blocking her strike with my dagger, and shoving her back with all the strength I had. And you think you do? Loyalty and power aren't things you steal, Evelyn. You earn them. Her laugh was sharp, hollow. Earn them. Look where that got you. Exiled, hated, alone. The words stung, but I refused to let them slow me down. I'm not alone, I said, my voice steady as I advanced on her. Not anymore. Evelyn's eyes flicked to the side, her focus breaking for just a moment. It was enough. I surged forward, feinting left before pivoting and driving the dagger toward her. She tried to dodge, but the blade found its mark, slicing across her side. She cried out, staggering back, her eyes wide with shock and fury. You don't get to hurt anyone else, I said, my voice low, fierce. Evelyn lunged again, her movements slower now, more erratic. I sidestepped, catching her wrist and twisting her arm, forcing her to the ground. She snarled, thrashing beneath me, but I didn't let go. Arya. Caleb's voice cut through the chaos, drawing my attention for a split second. I looked up to see him locked in a brutal fight with Damien, their movements a blur of claws and raw power. Caleb's strength was undeniable, his wolf relentless as he drove Damien back. Finish it, he growled, his voice both a command and a promise. I turned back to Evelyn, her struggles weakening as blood pooled beneath her. She stared up at me, her sneer fading into something almost pitiful. You think this changes anything? She whispered, her voice trembling. It changes everything, I replied, my voice steady. With a final, swift motion, I ended it. Evelyn stilled, her body going limp beneath me. The room was suddenly too quiet, the weight of the moment pressing down on me like a tidal wave. When I turned, Caleb was standing over Damien's lifeless form, his chest heaving, his green eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. For a moment our gazes locked, and something passed between us, something deeper than words. It wasn't over. Not yet. But together we'd made it through the storm. And for the first time, I felt like we just might be strong enough to face whatever came next. The moon was brighter than I'd ever seen it, casting the sacred clearing in a silvery glow that seemed almost ethereal. The tall pines framed the open space like ancient sentinels, their branches swaying gently in the cool breeze. It should have felt serene, but my chest was too tight, my thoughts too tangled to appreciate the beauty of the moment. We'd won. Evelyn and Damien were gone, their schemes dismantled. The rogues had scattered, the threat to the Moonfang clan vanquished, but the weight of everything that had led us here lingered like a shadow. I stood near the edge of the clearing, letting the moonlight kiss my skin as I tried to steady my breath. The bond hummed faintly between us, pulling me toward Caleb even when I wanted to resist. You're quiet, Caleb said from behind me, his voice low and rough, like he'd been carrying too much for too long. I didn't turn around. Is that surprising? His footsteps were soft, deliberate, as he closed the distance between us. Yes. I huffed a quiet laugh, my lips curving despite the turmoil in my chest. You'd be quiet too if your life had been turned upside down, blamed for things you didn't do, and forced to fight for people who didn't trust you. Caleb stilled, his presence a solid weight at my back. I felt him hesitate, as though searching for the right words. You're right, he said finally, his voice softer now. I didn't trust you, not when it mattered most. The confession hung in the air between us, heavy and raw. I turned then, meeting his gaze. His green eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight, their usual confidence replaced by something more vulnerable. You think an apology fixes that? I asked, my voice sharp, though the crack in it betrayed the emotions simmering beneath. No, he said without hesitation. It doesn't. But it's a start. I crossed my arms, trying to hold onto the anger that had sustained me through the worst of it. Do you know how it felt, Caleb? To stand there, surrounded by your pack, and watch you say nothing while they tore me apart. His jaw tightened, and he looked away, the weight of his guilt evident in the slump of his shoulders. I failed you, he admitted, his voice thick with regret. I thought I was protecting the pack, but all I did was hurt the one person I should have protected most. The words hit harder than I expected, chipping away at the walls I'd built around my heart. I thought I'd lost you, he continued, his gaze snapping back to mine. When you left, when I realized how wrong I'd been, I would have torn the world apart to find you. The raw honesty in his voice left me breathless, my anger slipping through my fingers like sand. I don't want apologies, Caleb, I said finally, my voice quieter now. I want to know why. Why me? Why now? He stepped closer, his hands twitching at his sides, like he wanted to reach for me, but wasn't sure if he should. Because you're mine, he said, the words a low, gravelly rumble that sent a shiver down my spine. My breath caught, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. The bond between us surged, stronger than ever, and I couldn't look away from him even if I wanted to. I didn't want to believe it, he admitted, his voice softer now, almost tender. I fought it because I thought it made me weak. But the truth is it makes me stronger. You make me stronger. The sincerity in his voice, the way his eyes burned with an emotion too deep to name, broke something in me. You're an idiot, I whispered, my voice trembling as I fought back tears. I know, he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. And then, before I could think better of it, I closed the distance between us, my hands fisting in his shirt, as I pressed my forehead to his chest. His arms came around me instantly, strong and warm and grounding. For the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself breathe. I'm sorry, he murmured, his voice muffled against my hair. For everything. I pulled back just enough to meet his gaze, my heart hammering in my chest. Don't make me regret this, Caleb. You won't, he said, his lips curving into a small, earnest smile. Not ever. The moonlight bathed us in its glow, the bond between us thrumming with a quiet certainty I could no longer deny. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. And for the first time, that felt like enough. The sacred clearing was alive with the moon's silver light, casting everything in an ethereal glow. The trees stood like sentinels around the space, their branches swaying gently in the cool night breeze. The air was thick with expectation, a hum that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath my bare feet. The pack was gathered in a wide circle, their faces illuminated by the flickering torches placed at the edges of the clearing. For the first time since I'd arrived here, their eyes weren't filled with suspicion or doubt. Instead, they watched with a mixture of curiosity and reverence, the weight of the moment pressing down on all of us. And then there was Caleb. He stood at the center of the clearing, his presence commanding and steady. The moonlight caught in his dark hair, the faint glow of his green eyes visible even from a distance. He wasn't wearing the stoic mask I'd come to associate with him. Instead, his expression was open, raw, and filled with something that made my heart twist in my chest. This is it? I asked, stepping toward him. My voice came out steadier than I expected, though my chest was tight with anticipation. This is it, he said, his lips curving into a small, almost shy smile. Caleb extended a hand toward me, and for a moment, I hesitated. My instinct screamed at me to run, to push him away before I let him too close, but the bond between us thrummed, pulling me forward. When I took his hand, warmth shot up my arm, grounding me. His thumb brushed lightly against my knuckles, the small gesture sending a shiver down my spine. Are you sure about this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer, his green eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that left me breathless. I've never been more sure of anything. The sincerity in his voice, the way he looked at me like I was the only thing that mattered, was almost too much. You're going to regret this, I said, though the teasing edge in my voice couldn't quite mask the emotions swirling beneath. Never, he said, the word a quiet vow. Caleb turned to face the pack, his voice steady as he spoke. Tonight, under the light of the full moon, I claim Arya as my mate. The murmurs that rippled through the crowd were brief, but they carried no hostility. Instead, the pack seemed to accept the declaration, their energy shifting, uniting in a way I hadn't felt before. He turned back to me, his hand still holding mine, and his expression softened. Arya, he began, his voice low but clear, I doubted you when I shouldn't have. I let my fear cloud what I knew deep down, that you're my mate, my makewill, my strength. The words hit like a tidal wave, breaking through every wall I'd built around my heart. He stepped closer, his other hand reaching up to brush a strand of hair from my face. You fought for yourself? For me? And for this pack? And I will spend the rest of my life making up for the times I failed to fight for you. My breath caught, and I nodded, unable to find words. Will you stand with me, Arya? He asked, his voice soft but filled with a quiet power. Will you let me protect you, fight for you, and love you? I swallowed hard, my throat tight with emotion. Only if you let me do the same for you. His lips twitched into a small, almost boyish grin. Deal. The ceremony itself was simple but charged with meaning. Caleb lifted my hand to his lips, brushing a kiss across my knuckles before stepping behind me. Are you ready? He murmured, his breath warm against my ear. Always, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. His teeth grazed the curve of my neck, and a shiver ran through me, the bond between us sparking like electricity. The bite was quick, sharp, and filled with an intensity that left me breathless. Heat flooded my veins as the bond solidified, a wave of emotions crashing over me, his protectiveness, his admiration, his love. It was overwhelming and grounding all at once, and I knew in that moment that I wasn't alone anymore. When he pulled back, the clearing erupted into howls, the sound reverberating through the trees and deep into my chest. I turned to face him, my hand instinctively going to the mark on my neck. Caleb's gaze was soft, his lips curving into a smile that was meant only for me. Mine, he said, the single word filled with quiet certainty. Yours, I replied, my voice just as certain. For the first time in a long time I felt like I belonged, not just to a pack but to him, to us. The air in the sacred clearing felt different now, humming with energy and unity that hadn't been there before. The pack's howls still echoed in the night, their voices a chorus of acceptance and acknowledgement that vibrated in my chest. I stood in the circle, Caleb at my side, and for the first time, I felt something I hadn't dared to hope for: belonging. I let my gaze sweep across the gathered pack. The faces that had once been etched with suspicion and mistrust now carried something else: respect. Rhea was the first to step forward, her sharp features illuminated by the moonlight. She paused a few feet away, her gaze steady as it met mine. You fought for us, she said simply, her voice firm but free of the cold edge I'd grown used to. For this pack. For him. Her eyes flicked to Caleb briefly before returning to me. You didn't have to, but you did. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. It wasn't just for you, I admitted. It was for me too. I needed to prove to myself that I could. Rhea nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Well, you did, and I'll fight beside you any day. The words hit harder than I expected, a wave of warmth spreading through me. The others followed suit, stepping forward one by one to offer quiet words of thanks or simple nods of acknowledgement. Each gesture chipped away at the doubts that had lingered in my chest, replacing them with something stronger. When Marcus approached, I braced myself, unsure of what to expect. His expression was unreadable as he stopped in front of me, his hazel eyes scanning my face. You're tougher than I thought, he said after a moment, his voice gruff but not unkind. Is that your version of an apology? I asked, raising an eyebrow. A flicker of a smile crossed his lips, gone almost as quickly as it came. Don't push your luck. I couldn't help but laugh, the sound lighter than I'd felt in days. Noted. As the pack began to disperse, Caleb turned to me, his green eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. They see you now, he said softly, his voice filled with quiet pride. I looked up at him, my chest tightening at the sincerity in his gaze. And you? Do you see me now? He reached for my hand, his touch warm and steady. I've always seen you, Arya, he murmured, his voice a promise. The bond between us thrummed, stronger than ever, and for the first time, I let myself believe in us. The pack had accepted me. But more importantly, I had accepted myself. Chapter 7. The Alpha's estate buzzed with energy, a kind of warmth and camaraderie I hadn't expected to feel when I first arrived. The grand hall, usually imposing with its towering stone walls and heavy wooden beams, now felt alive with laughter and conversation. The pack had gathered to celebrate, their smiles genuine, their voices carrying a rhythm that seemed to breathe life into the space. It was surreal. Just weeks ago, I'd been the outsider, the Omega, accused of betrayal, fighting tooth and nail for every shred of respect. Now I stood at the center of the room, surrounded by people who had finally accepted me, finally seen me for who I was. And then there was Caleb. He stood beside me, his presence grounding as always. His hand brushed against mine, a small, fleeting gesture, but it sent warmth spiraling through me. His green eyes found mine, and the quiet pride in his gaze made my chest tighten. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low enough that only I could hear. I nodded, a soft laugh escaping me. "I've been exiled, accused, and nearly killed. A celebration's nothing." His lips twitched into a smirk. "You're handling it better than I thought." "Don't push it, Alpha," I teased, though the smile tugging at my lips betrayed my playfulness. Freya stepped forward, her expression softer than I'd ever seen it. She raised a glass, her voice cutting through the hum of conversation. "Tonight we welcome Arya as one of us, not just as Caleb's mate, but as a member of the Moonfang clan." A chorus of howls followed her words, the sound reverberating through the hall, and sending a shiver down my spine. I glanced at Caleb, my chest tightening as the pack's acceptance finally settled over me. "You did it," he said, his voice warm. "We did it," I corrected, my gaze steady on his. Marcus approached next, his usual stern expression softened by a rare smile. "Welcome to the pack," he said, offering a hand. "Thanks," I said, shaking it. "I think." He chuckled, a low, quiet sound. "Don't make me regret it." "I'll try my best," I replied, earning a small laugh from those nearby. As the celebration continued, Caleb caught my hand, pulling me toward the quieter edge of the hall. My pulse quickened at the intensity in his gaze, the quiet determination that made it impossible to look away. "What's this about?" I asked, my voice soft. He didn't answer right away, instead reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small silver pendant. It was simple but beautiful, the symbol of the Moonfang clan etched into its surface with intricate detail. "This is for you," he said, his voice steady. "It's a tradition an Alpha's mate wears the clan's mark. It's a way of showing the pack that you belong, that you're one of us." My breath caught as he held it out to me, the silver glinting in the firelight. "Caleb," his expression softened, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You don't have to wear it if you don't want to, but I want you to have it." I reached out, my fingers brushing his, as I took the pendant. It felt cool against my skin, its weight surprisingly reassuring. "Help me with it?" I asked, turning slightly. He stepped closer, his fingers brushing the back of my neck as he fastened a chain. The contact sent a shiver down my spine, the bond between us humming softly in the background. When he stepped back, his gaze lingered on me, his voice low. "Perfect." I touched the pendant, a smile spreading across my lips. "Thank you." "For what?" "For everything." His hand found mine, his grip warm and steady. "You're everything, Arya. I hope you know that." The warmth in his voice, the sincerity in his gaze, made my heart ache in the best way. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The sacred clearing looked different under the stars. The moon, high and bright, bathed everything in its silver glow, casting long shadows that danced with the gentle sway of the trees. The air was cool, crisp, and carried the faintest scent of pine and moss, mingling with something warmer, Caleb's scent, grounding and unmistakable. I stood near the center of the clearing, my fingers brushing the pendant he'd given me earlier. It felt strange, having something that symbolized belonging after so long without it. But it wasn't just the pendant that felt heavy tonight. It was the weight of everything that had happened, the battles fought, the walls broken, and the bond forged between us. "You're quiet," Caleb said from behind me, his voice low and warm. I turned to find him leaning against one of the massive trees, his hands shoved casually into his pockets. The moonlight caught in his dark hair, casting his sharp features in stark relief. He looked every bit the alpha strong, steady, and undeniably magnetic, but there was a softness in his expression that was just for me. "Just thinking," I said, smiling faintly. "Dangerous?" he teased, stepping closer. I raised a brow. "You're one to talk." His lips twitched into a smirk, but his eyes softened as he reached me. "What are you thinking about?" I hesitated, my gaze drifting to the sky. The stars seemed endless tonight, a glittering tapestry that stretched beyond comprehension. "About how far we've come," I admitted, my voice quieter now. "About how impossible this all seemed not too long ago." He was silent for a moment, and when I glanced back at him, his expression had shifted. The smirk was gone, replaced by something deeper, something raw. "It wasn't impossible," he said softly. "It just took time." I huffed a quiet laugh. "That's putting it lightly. You didn't exactly make things easy." "I could say the same about you," he countered, his tone playful but edged with warmth. We stood there, the space between us filled with unspoken words, and the quiet hum of the bond that had grown stronger with every step of our journey. "You scared me," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "When you didn't trust me, when you hesitated." His jaw tightened, and he reached for my hand, his touch warm and steady. "I was scared too," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "Not of you, never of you. I was scared of losing control, of failing the pack, of failing you." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the weight he carried, the quiet guilt that still lingered in his eyes. "You didn't fail me," I said softly. "We both made mistakes, but we're here. Together. That's what matters." He stepped closer, his hand still holding mine as his free hand brushed a stray strand of hair from my face. The simple gesture sent a shiver down my spine, the bond between us thrumming like a quiet, steady heartbeat. "You're right," he said, his voice dropping lower. "But I don't think I'll ever stop trying to make it up to you." "You don't have to make it up to me," I said, my lips curving into a small smile. "Just don't stop being here. Don't stop fighting for this." "I won't," he promised, his green eyes locking onto mine. "Not ever." The air between us shifted, the cool night fading into the background as the heat of his presence enveloped me. For a moment the world felt smaller, quieter, like it was just the two of us standing beneath the stars. He leaned in slowly, his gaze flicking to my lips before returning to my eyes. "You're everything, Aria," he murmured, his voice soft but steady. "I hope you know that." "I do," I whispered, my heart pounding as his lips brushed mine. The kiss was slow, deliberate, and filled with every unspoken word, every promise we hadn't yet made. It wasn't just a kiss, it was an affirmation, a declaration, and a beginning all at once. When we pulled back, his forehead rested against mine, his breath warm against my skin. "We've come a long way," I said, my voice shaky but filled with quiet joy. "And we've got so much further to go," he replied, his lips brushing mine again in a brief, tender kiss. For the first time in forever, I felt like the future wasn't something to fear. It was something to embrace, something to fight for. And as we stood there in the sacred clearing, the moonlight wrapping us in its glow, I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't facing it alone. The moon seemed impossibly large, its silver glow spilling over the sacred clearing like a soft, shimmering blanket. The cool breeze carried the faint scent of pine and the crisp bite of night air, but all I could feel was Caleb, his heat, his presence, the quiet intensity in his gaze as he stood before me. It felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of us. I traced my fingers over the pendant hanging around my neck, the intricate engraving of the Moonfang clan's symbol catching the light. "You've given me a place here," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. "But what if it's not enough? What if?" Caleb stepped closer, cutting off my words with the sheer weight of his presence. "Aria," he said, his voice low, steady, "you are enough. You've always been enough." The words hit me like a tidal wave, and I blinked, trying to swallow the lump rising in my throat. "You don't know how much I needed to hear that." He reached out, his fingers brushing against mine, before capturing my hand in his. The simple gesture sent warmth spiraling through me, grounding and electric all at once. I'm not just saying it. I mean it, he said, his green eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my pulse race. I will stand by your side, no matter what. Through everything. Always. The bond between us thrummed, stronger than ever, as if his words had solidified it, made it something unbreakable. I couldn't speak, couldn't find the words to match what I felt in that moment, so I let my actions speak for me. I stepped closer, closing the already small distance between us. My free hand rose to his chest, resting over the steady beat of his heart. "Caleb," I whispered, my voice trembling with the weight of emotions I could no longer contain. His hand cupped my cheek, his thumb brushing gently along my skin. "Tell me to stop, and I will," he murmured, his breath warm against my lips. "But if you feel even a fraction of what I feel right now, I do," I said, the words spilling out before I could think. "I feel it, Caleb. I feel everything." And then he kissed me. It wasn't soft or tentative. It was a kiss filled with fire, with everything we'd been holding back for so long. His lips moved against mine with a hunger that matched my own, his hands tangling in my hair as he pulled me closer. The world faded away, leaving only the heat of his touch, the strength of his arms as they wrapped around me, anchoring me to him. My fingers gripped the fabric of his shirt, desperate to pull him closer, to close the distance that still felt too vast, despite the way our bodies pressed together. The bond between us flared, a warm, pulsing energy that seemed to envelop us, pulling us deeper into each other. "Arya," he whispered against my lips, his voice raw, breathless. I pulled back just enough to look at him, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. His green eyes burned with a mixture of desire and something deeper, something that made my heart ache in the best way. The clearing felt alive around us, the moonlight casting a soft glow over everything, as if the universe itself had conspired to make this moment perfect. "I'm yours," I said, the words a quiet vow. "And I'm yours," he replied, his voice steady, certain. He lifted me effortlessly, his movements sure and confident, as he carried me to the center of the clearing, where the moonlight was brightest. The cool grass brushed against my skin as he laid me down, his hands gentle but firm, his touch igniting a fire that burned hotter with every passing second. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice softer now, his forehead resting against mine. "Yes," I whispered, my hands sliding up to cup his face. "I've never been more sure of anything." The next moments were a blur of heat and intensity, of whispered promises and stolen breaths. His touch was both reverent and possessive, his kisses trailing fire along my skin. The bond between us surged as we came together. A connection that went beyond the physical, tying us together in a way that felt eternal, unbreakable. Under the glow of the full moon, we became one, our hearts and souls entwined as we gave ourselves to each other completely. And as the night stretched on, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. Always. The Midnight Inn was unlike any place I'd been before. Nestled in the heart of neutral territory, it was a sanctuary of sorts, a place where rivalries were set aside, and even the most dangerous wolves could relax, at least on the surface. The warm glow of lanterns lit the main hall, casting flickering shadows across the rustic wooden beams and polished tables. The hum of quiet conversations filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of whiskey and wood smoke. I leaned back in my chair, savoring the rare moment of peace. Caleb sat beside me, his hand resting lightly on my knee, his thumb brushing back and forth in a gesture so casual it might have been missed by anyone else. But to me, it was everything, a constant reminder of the bond between us. "I could get used to this," I said, a faint smile tugging at my lips. "Careful," Caleb replied, his tone teasing but edged with warmth. "If you get too comfortable, you'll forget how much trouble you like to cause." I laughed, nudging his shoulder with mine. "Me? Trouble? Never?" Before he could retort, Marcus approached, his expression grim enough to extinguish any trace of humor. He held a folded piece of paper in one hand, the edges slightly crumpled as though he'd been gripping it too tightly. "Marcus," Caleb said, his tone shifting instantly to that of the alpha. "What's wrong?" Marcus slid the paper onto the table between us, his hazel eyes flicking between Caleb and me. This came in from one of our scouts near the southern border. Caleb picked up the note, his brows furrowing, as he scanned the contents. I couldn't see what it said, but the tension that rolled off him was enough to make my stomach knot. "What is it?" I asked, leaning closer. Caleb didn't answer immediately, his jaw tightening as he handed the note to me. The message was brief but unsettling, rising tensions with the Red Claw Pack. Reports of rogue sightings near their borders. Possible alliance forming. My heart sank as I reread the words. The Red Claw Pack was infamous for their aggression, their willingness to do whatever it took to expand their territory. If they were aligning with rogues, it was bad news for everyone. "This isn't just about us," Marcus said, his voice low. "If they're working with rogues, it could destabilize the entire region." Caleb nodded, his expression unreadable, but his green eyes sharp with determination. "We need more information. If the Red Claw Pack is making a move, we can't afford to be caught off guard." As they discussed strategy, I couldn't shake the unease settling in my chest. The bond between Caleb and me hummed softly, a steady reassurance that we were stronger together. But even that wasn't enough to quiet the questions swirling in my mind. Why would the Red Claw Pack risk aligning with rogues? And what did it mean for us? For the Moonfang clan? Caleb must have sensed my thoughts because he reached for my hand, his grip firm and grounding. "We'll figure it out," he said, his voice steady. I nodded, my resolve hardening. "Together." Marcus cleared his throat, his gaze flicking between us. "You two should enjoy the night while you can. Something tells me peace won't last long." His words hung in the air, a quiet promise of the challenges to come. As the lanterns cast their golden light across the midnight inn, and the distant howl of wolves echoed through the night, I couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning. Because in our world, peace was always fleeting, and the battles we'd fought were only the first of many. The story closes with Caleb's hand still holding mine, the bond between us unshakable even as the weight of the future loomed. Whatever came next, we'd face it together, and that was enough. For now.